Hadi. Selam. Salatu vesselamu ala Resulina Muhammedin seyyidil evliya. Meded ya Resul, meded ya Sadat Asabı, meded ya Meşahın Desturu, ve inşallah fazla senşi Muhammed'e hakaret tarikatuna ve sahba ve hayru fil cem'iyye. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. يقول يا ويلتى إلتنا لما اتخذ فلان خليلا لقد أضلنا ذكره. صدق الله العظيم. Cehennemde, gene cehennemden bahsediyoruz ki insanlar nefislerine hürriyet vermiş.
This is to make clear what leads to hellfire, and it's important to know what leads to hell in order to take precautions. And people, they are now in a state where they are doing as their ego desires, and they have given full freedom to their egos.
İstediğini yapsın diye. O hürriyetle beraber de kendi iradelerini kullanmayıp başkalarının iradesini kullanıp,
and not only have they given full freedom to their own egos and they do as they like, which leads them to hell, but in addition to that, they also act based on the will of others.
Onlara tabi olup gittikleri yol sonunda cehenneme varmalarına sebep oluyor.
They follow others, they obey others, and they are acting with the will of others, but the way they are shown by them leads them to hell in the end.
Diyor, Kur'an-ı Azimüşşan'da bu hallerini anlatıyor.
And in the Holy Quran, Allah Almighty describes their state and describes this situation.
Allah şey çekiyor, ağıt çekiyor kendi kendine. Keşke buna tabi olmasaydım.
And Allah Almighty describes their state and how they will be lamenting and blaming themselves, saying, if only I had not followed them. Woe to me, if only I had not followed them.
Keşke bunun yolundan gitmeseydim.
Woe to me if I only had not followed his way.
Ben doğru yoldayken yoldan çıkarttı beni.
Woe to me that I followed that person's way. I was going the right way and I went astray by following that person's way.
Ben güzel yoldayken beni yoldan çıkarttı.
I was following the good and beautiful way, but instead I went astray by following that person's way.
Vay halime diyor.
Woe to me. Thus, Allah Almighty describes the state and situation of those lamenting and blaming themselves for having left the right way by following others.
Bu hal bundan daha kötü hal olamaz.
There could be not a situation that could be worse than this.
O yolda gittim de yolumu düzgündü.
There could be nothing worse than actually having followed the right way and then having gone astray because one followed others.
Yoldan çıkartmaz beni.
And there could be nothing worse than making oneself be led astray by succumbing to others.
Şimdiki hal böyledir insanların.
And that is the situation people find themselves in today.
Doğru yoldan giden, Allah yoluna gideni
initially they follow the right way, they follow the way of Allah Almighty.
Kabul etmiyorlar. Kendi kafalarına göre başka şeyler söylüyor. Yok şuydu, yok buydu.
But then they follow others who do not accept the way of Allah Almighty, who make up things based on their own likings, based on their own thoughts and minds, and make people go astray.
Ta küçükler fazla değil de o biraz aklı başına bali olunca şeytan daha fazla musallat oluyor.
And it is Shaitan who attacks people and makes them go astray, and the moment, maybe small children are not affected, but the moment someone starts to reason, someone starts to be aware of his mind, that is the moment when Shaitan souls, people,
Şeytandan beter de şeytanın adamları,
and who is worse than shaitan are those people who make others go astray the moment they can start thinking.
arkadaşlardı, şuydu buydu. Yok sen bunu dinleme, bu şey yapma.
And there are so many people in one's environment, in a young person's environment. The moment he starts thinking, he's led astray by those around him, giving him bad advices, such as bad friends who tell him, do not listen to him, do not follow the way of Allah Almighty.
Tamam, dinlemesen bunun karşılığında ne alacaksın? Hiçbir şey.
But what is it that they recommend you to do? They recommend you to do things which lead to nothing and which make you gain no reward. By following them and by not following the way of Allah Almighty, you end up with nothing.
Onlara dinlemesen o vakit her şey senin.
But if you had not listened to those around you, to those advices against you following the way of Allah Almighty, you would have won everything by having followed the way of Allah Almighty.
Kimsenin fikriyle o yaptı diye ben de yaparım, iyi olur diye.
Don't let yourselves be led astray by other people's thoughts, by other people's opinions, or by other people's recommendations to advise you to go against the way of Allah Almighty. Don't say it is okay because others do it.
Bu düşünce adamı helak eder.
If you think that because others do it, that something is okay, then you must know that such a way will lead you to ruin and destruction.
Sonunda telafisi olmayan bir yere gitmiş olur ki
you will have followed a way where you will end up in a situation where you can no longer compensate what you did.
Allah muhafaza etsin.
May Allah Almighty protect us from such a thing.
Dünyadayken hepsini telafi edebilir insan.
While you are still alive in this world, you can compensate everything.
Kötülüğü Allah'tan af diler, Allah Azze ve Celle'den af diler.
As long as you are alive, you may ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness.
Mağfiret diler.
And you may ask Allah Almighty for His mercy.
Yolun devam eder. O yol kendisini cennete götürür.
And then you may follow the way of Allah Almighty, the way of mercy, which will then lead you to paradise.
Yok, onu beğenmezse bunlar kafaları eski kafa, yeni kafa derken bir bakar ki kafası gitmiş.
But if you do not like the way of Allah Almighty, instead listen to others who tell you other things and who tell you that those who follow the way of Allah Almighty are backward-minded and they call themselves to be forward-minded. But then, if you follow them, not following the way of Allah Almighty, you will be in a state of mindlessness and you will have lost your mind.
Onun için dikkat etmek lazım.
Therefore, one needs to be careful.
Bu gittiğin yol, gösterdiği yol doğru mudur, değil midir?
You must check whether the way you follow and the way you are shown is right or wrong.
Onu iyi bakmak lazım.
And you must meticulously scrutinize whether the way you are shown and whether the way you follow is right or wrong.
İyi baksın. Çoluk çocuk o en çok onlar yok inanıyorum, yok inanmıyorum derken yoldan çıkıp akıl bali olduktan sonra mesuliyet var.
Especially you must pay attention to children. These days, children, you must be aware that to be a child comes at a certain age, but at a certain age, even those you consider to be a child may already reach maturity and they are able to reason. And the moment a child can reason and the moment a child has reached maturity, it will be held accountable.
Şimdiki gibi değil, 18 yaşında mesuliyet diye bir şey yok.
Responsibility does not come only after the age of 18.
Aklın bali olduğu vakit o vakit senin mesuliyetin var.
You will be held accountable even before that. The moment you reach maturity, the moment you are able to think and reason, that is when you will start to be held accountable for what you do.
O mesuliyet küçüksün, büyüksün, küçük büyük değil de bir akıl bali var. Ondan önce var. Çocuk sayılır. Çocuğun hesabı başka.
Of course, there's an age for children and an early age where they have not yet reached maturity and where they cannot yet think for themselves and have an awareness for themselves. At that age, of course, they are not held accountable. However, in today's world, those who people consider children are still held accountable because they have reached a certain age where they can in fact already reason, where they have reached a maturity to think for themselves, and that is the moment when they are held accountable too.
Hesapları onun Allah Azze ve Celle esas hesap akıl bali olduktan sonra 13, 14, 15 ne zaman
And people may consider people with the age of 13, 14, 15 still children, but a youngster at the age of 13, 14, 15 already has reached that maturity that he can think for himself, that he can reason, and that he is aware of his mind. And with the age reaching maturity at the age of 13, 14, 15, one is already in the position where he will be held accountable.
Hesap odur. Şimdiki işte 17,5 yaşında adam vurdu, çocuktur, bir yapılmaz.
It is not as people make laws today when they say that child was yet at the age of 17 and a half, he has not reached the age of 18, and that person at the age of 17 and a half, he may have shot or hit someone, and then they will say at the court he cannot be held accountable because he's still a child.
Yok, öyle bir şey yok.
But there's no such thing in the sight of Allah Almighty.
Yani Allah'ın indinde tabii çocuksa gene yapsa gene cezası var ama
in the sight of Allah Almighty, those who people may consider children today are held accountable.
Esas akıl bali olduktan sonra hesabı büyük gibi aynen, yani hiç değişiklik bir şey yok.
In the sight of Allah Almighty, the moment the child reaches maturity and can think and reason for himself and can make use of his mind, that is the moment where in the sight of Allah Almighty, that person will already be held accountable and will be held accountable like an adult.
Onun için ben çocuğum, ben küçüğüm de yok.
There's no excuse to say, I'm a child, I'm not going to be held accountable. It is regardless of what they define as a child. In the sight, what is important, in the sight of Allah Almighty, what matters is whether someone has reached maturity and has the capability to reason and use his mind. That is the moment where someone will be held accountable regardless of what they define as a child.
Sen akıl bali olduktan sonra sen adam muamelesi yapılırsın.
The moment you have reached the maturity to reason, to think and use your mind, that is the moment when you will be treated like an adult.
Kadınsa kızsa kadın muamelesi yapılır o vakit.
A boy will be treated like a man and a girl will be treated like a woman.
Onun da cezası, kuvveti var.
And that boy and that girl, the moment they have reached maturity, will be held accountable, and they are accountable for their deeds.
Onun için dikkat etmek lazım.
Therefore, one needs to be careful.
Aklını kullansın insan.
And people should therefore use their minds.
Akıl boşuna vermemiş Allah Azze ve Celle.
Allah Almighty has not given you a mind, has not given you the capability to think for nothing.
Aklını kullanan dünyada da kurtulur, ahirette de kurtulur.
The one who uses his mind to think and to reason will be saved both in this world as well as in the hereafter.
Allah aklımızı kullanmayı nasip etsin hepimize.
May Allah Almighty enable us all to use our minds and to think and reason properly.
Aklımızdan mahrum etmesin.
And may Allah Almighty protect us from being deprived of our minds.
Allah tevfik. El-Fatiha.